The crimson sun hung low over the rust-colored horizon of Xylos, casting long shadows across the barren landscape, as it had every day for the past 3 years since Kalen had made this forgotten outpost his home. He moved through the cramped corridors of the abandoned research station with practiced efficiency, checking system readings and making minor adjustments to the life support regulators, a daily ritual that kept both the station and his mind functioning. The station had been state-of-the-art once, when the ExoCorp mining surveys first discovered the mineral deposits that made Xylos temporarily valuable. But that was 15 years ago. Now, it was just another abandoned corporate investment, left to be reclaimed by the planet's unforgiving elements, much like Kalen himself. He paused at the viewport in what had once been the station's communal area, now converted into his workshop. Tools and dismantled equipment littered the tables, projects half-finished and abandoned when motivation failed him. Outside, the wind was picking up, carrying the fine, reddish sand that would inevitably find its way into every seal and crevice despite his best efforts. "Another storm," he muttered to no one. His own voice sounded foreign in his ears. How long had it been since he'd spoken aloud? Weeks, perhaps. There was no one to talk to out here, and that was exactly how he wanted it, how he needed it to be. The alert tone from the station sensor array was so unexpected that Kalen initially mistook it for a system malfunction. The ancient console in the communications hub had remained silent for so long that he'd almost forgotten its purpose. But now it flashed insistently, a weak signal registering on frequencies that hadn't been used in standard communications for a decade. Kalen's first instinct was to ignore it. The station's systems were old, prone to glitches and false readings. Besides, acknowledging the signal meant acknowledging the possibility of contact with the world he'd left behind, the world that had taken everything from him when ExoCorp's revolutionary bioengineering project had gone catastrophically wrong under his scientific direction. 43 lives lost. 43 families shattered because he had failed to identify the instability in the genetic modification sequence. But curiosity, that damnable trait that had driven him into science in the first place, wouldn't let him walk away. After staring at the pulsing indicator for several long minutes, Kalen reluctantly initiated a diagnostic scan, expecting to find a sensor error or atmospheric interference. Instead, the signal strengthened momentarily before weakening again. The pattern was irregular, neither natural nor conforming to any standard distress protocol. It was almost as if someone's trying not to be found, Kalen whispered, his fingers hovering over the console. That thought resonated with something deep inside him. For 3 years, he'd been doing exactly that, hiding, surviving, existing without truly living. Against his better judgment, Kalen triangulated the signal's origin. It was coming from the Razorback Ridges, a treacherous formation of jagged rock spires approximately 12 kilometers northeast of the station. The area was notorious even among the experienced survey teams that had once operated here. Unpredictable terrain with deep crevasses and frequent rock slides. "Not your problem," he told himself firmly, turning away from the console. "Not your concern." But as the signal's strength fluctuated, gradually weakening as the minutes passed, something shifted inside Kalen. The memory of his failure at ExoCorp had kept him paralyzed for years, preventing him from taking action, from risking involvement. But what if inaction now would simply add another weight to the burden he already carried? With a frustrated growl, Kalen grabbed his environment suit from its hook near the airlock. It was old and patched in several places, but it would protect him from Xylos' thin, caustic atmosphere. He packed a basic survival kit, some rudimentary medical supplies, and his multi-tool. "This is stupid," he muttered as he sealed the suit and checked the oxygen levels. Probably nothing but space junk or an old satellite breaking up in the atmosphere. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this might be something or someone in genuine need. And despite everything, despite his self-imposed exile and the guilt that had driven him here, Kalen could not ignore a cry for help. Not again. The journey to the Razorback Ridges was arduous. Kalen's rover, a salvaged ExoCorp survey vehicle, struggled over the increasingly difficult terrain. As he approached the coordinates, the wind intensified, visibility deteriorating as fine particles of sand clouded the air. Several times, he nearly turned back, reasoning that no one could survive in these conditions anyway. But just as he crested a particularly steep incline, he saw it, a gash in the red earth, fresh and violent. And at the end of this wound in the planet's surface lay the crumpled remains of what appeared to be an escape pod. The craft was unlike anything Kalen had seen before. Smaller than standard human escape vessels, with an oddly organic design that seemed to flow rather than being constructed of distinct components. Most of it was buried in the loose soil and rock, but what remained visible was severely damaged, the hull breached in multiple places. "Hello," Kalen called through his suit's external speaker as he approached cautiously. "Anyone alive in there?" No response came, but his scanner detected a faint energy signature emanating from within the wreckage. With growing trepidation, Kalen cleared debris from what appeared to be the entry hatch. The mechanism was foreign, but after some examination, he managed to trigger the emergency release. The interior was dark and cramped, designed for a single occupant. Most of the systems were dead, with only one small emergency light casting eerie blue shadows across the cabin. And there, strapped to what must have been the pilot's seat, was a figure. Kalen's breath caught in his throat. The being before him was humanoid, but unmistakably alien. Even in the dim light, he could see that her skin, for the figure appeared female in form, had a subtle lavender hue that shifted to deeper purple in places. Her features were delicate, almost ethereal, with large, almond-shaped eyes currently closed in unconsciousness. Fine, silver-white hair formed intricate patterns against her scalp. But what truly shocked Kalen was the being's abdomen, distended and moving with unmistakable contractions. She was pregnant, and from the rhythm of those contractions and her labored breathing, she was in active labor. "My God," Kalen whispered, his scientific mind racing to process what he was seeing while his human instincts screamed that she needed immediate help. A closer inspection revealed something even more disturbing. The pod's life support systems hadn't simply failed in the crash. They had been deliberately disabled. The oxygen reserves were empty despite intact tanks, and the medical support unit had been manually disengaged. This wasn't an accident. Someone had intended for this woman and her unborn child to die. The alien woman stirred slightly, her features contorting in pain as another contraction seized her. Her eyes fluttered open momentarily, revealing irises of the most intense violet Kalen had ever seen. There was fear in those eyes and pain, but also a fierce determination that spoke across the barriers of species. In that moment, Kalen's hesitation vanished. This was a living being who needed help, who had been abandoned to die with her child. Whatever risks came with helping her, he would face them. "I'm going to help you," he said softly, knowing she couldn't understand his words, but hoping his tone might convey his intentions. "I'm going to get you somewhere safe." Working as quickly as he dared, Kalen assessed her condition. She was weakened from what appeared to be blood loss, though her blood was darker than human blood, with an almost iridescent quality. The contractions were coming rapidly now. There was no time to waste. With extreme care, Kalen freed her from the restraints and prepared to move her to his rover. The woman's eyes opened again, wider this time, filled with suspicion and fear. She tried to speak, her voice producing sounds unlike any human language Kalen had heard, musical and complex. "I know you're scared," Kalen said, making his movements slow and deliberate. "But I think your baby is coming soon, and we need to get you somewhere safer than this." Whether it was his calm demeanor, her desperate situation, or simply that she had no choice, the alien woman stopped resisting. As gently as possible, Kalen lifted her from the wrecked pod. She was lighter than he expected, despite her pregnancy, her body seeming almost hollow-boned like a bird's. The journey back to the research station was a race against time. The alien woman drifted in and out of consciousness, each contraction drawing a keening sound from her that made Kalen's heart ache with sympathy. The storm was worsening, reducing visibility to near zero at times. Twice they almost didn't make it when the rover slid dangerously close to drop-offs hidden by the swirling dust. By the time they reached the station, the woman's contractions were almost continuous. Kalen carried her directly to the small medical bay, his mind racing through his knowledge of human childbirth and wondering how much of it would apply here. "Okay," he said, laying her carefully on the examination table. "I'm going to help you through this." Somehow, the next few hours were the most intense of Kalen's life since the ExoCorp disaster. Using the limited medical equipment available and his background in biological engineering, he monitored the alien woman's vital signs as best he could, improvising when his instruments couldn't make sense of her physiology. The birth itself was both similar to and profoundly different from human childbirth. The contractions followed a recognizable pattern, but the woman's body seemed to open differently, a specialized birth canal becoming visible only during active labor. Kalen found himself drawing on his scientific training to remain clinical and focused, even as wonder and fear competed for dominance in his mind. When complications arose, a membrane that wouldn't rupture properly, the baby presenting in an unusual position, Kalen was forced to intervene more directly. His hands trembled as he made delicate adjustments, guided more by intuition than knowledge. The woman's eyes locked onto his during these moments, and despite the pain, there was an intelligence there that seemed to understand what he was trying to do. Finally, with a series of powerful contractions and one last keening cry from the mother, the baby emerged into Kalen's waiting hands. The newborn was small, with skin that shifted between the mother's lavender and a more human-like pink, as if its very cells were still deciding what to become. A fine dusting of silvery down covered its head, and when it opened its eyes, far earlier than a human infant would, they were a startling blue-violet that seemed to contain flecks of light. "Hello there," Kalen whispered, cleaning the infant carefully while monitoring its breathing. The child made no sound, but its chest rose and fell steadily. Its tiny hands, with elongated fingers tipped by nail beds that glowed faintly, reached upward with surprising coordination. The mother had fallen unconscious immediately after the birth, her body going limp with exhaustion. Kalen quickly checked her vital signs, finding them weak but present. Blood loss was significant, and he noticed her temperature dropping rapidly. Whether this was normal for her species or a sign of shock, he couldn't tell. Working efficiently, Kalen set up an improvised incubator for the newborn, using a specimen containment unit modified to maintain optimal temperature and humidity. Then he turned his full attention to the mother, using antibiotics and synthetic blood substitutes that he hoped were compatible with her physiology. It was a desperate gamble, but without intervention, she would likely die. For 3 days, Kalen barely slept, dividing his time between mother and child. The infant began accepting small amounts of a nutrient solution he formulated based on the composition of the mother's milk, which he'd managed to extract manually. The mother remained unconscious but stable, her body temperature gradually returning to what Kalen assumed was her baseline. On the 4th day, as Kalen was checking the infant's reflexes, he heard a sound behind him. Turning, he found himself staring into the fully alert violet eyes of the alien woman. Her gaze immediately darted to the baby in his hands, and her body tensed with unmistakable maternal protectiveness. Kalen slowly, carefully brought the infant to her. "Your baby is doing well," he said softly. "A girl, I think, though I'm not entirely sure how your species determines these things." The woman's eyes never left her child as Kalen placed the infant in her arms. Her long fingers traced the baby's features with infinite tenderness, and she made a series of musical sounds that Kalen interpreted as her speaking to her child. But when Kalen reached to adjust the monitoring device attached to the woman's arm, she flinched violently, pulling away and curling protectively around her baby. Her eyes, so tender a moment before, now burned with fear and suspicion. "I'm not going to hurt you," Kalen said, raising his hands to show they were empty. "I've been taking care of you both. You were injured in labor. Do you remember?" The woman's expression didn't change. She clutched her child closer and tried to sit up, only to fall back with a gasp of pain. Her gaze darted around the room, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings, the medical equipment, Kalen himself. Everything appeared to register as a potential threat. Communication was going to be the first major challenge. Kalen tried simple gestures, pointing to himself and saying his name, then pointing to water and food to indicate she could eat. The woman watched him warily, but made no attempt to reciprocate or communicate. Over the next few days, a tense routine developed. Kalen would enter the medical bay with food and supplies, set them down at a distance, and retreat to give the woman space. She would wait until he was well away before taking what she needed. She refused to let him examine either herself or the baby, growling softly if he came too close. The only breakthrough came nearly a week after her awakening. Kalen had been working in his lab area, analyzing fragments he'd retrieved from the escape pod, when he heard a crash from the medical bay. Rushing in, he found the woman collapsed on the floor, halfway to the door, the baby clutched tightly in her arms. She had been trying to escape, but in her weakened state, her legs had given out. Now she stared up at him with a mixture of defiance and desperation, clearly expecting punishment or worse. Instead, Kalen slowly knelt down several feet away from her. "You're not prisoners here," he said gently. "But you're still healing, and it's dangerous outside. Xylos isn't a hospitable planet, even with proper equipment." Though she couldn't understand his words, something in his tone or expression must have reached her. She stopped trying to retreat, allowing Kalen to approach close enough to help her back to the bed. As he supported her weight, he felt how fragile she still was, how close to death she had been. That evening, Kalen brought a portable computer to the medical bay and attempted to establish some basic communication. He showed her simple images, water, food, sleep, paired with the corresponding words. To his surprise, she watched attentively, occasionally making sounds that seemed to be her equivalent terms. Among the wreckage from the escape pod, Kalen had found a small metal disc with unusual markings. He had initially assumed it was a component of the ship, but when he showed it to the woman, her reaction was immediate and intense. She reached for it with trembling hands, clutching it to her chest with an expression of such profound relief that Kalen realized it must be something deeply personal. The disk contained what appeared to be a data storage system of some kind. When the woman pressed certain points in a specific sequence, it projected a holographic display of symbols unlike any language Kalen had encountered. She studied these intently, occasionally glancing at Kalen as if assessing something about him based on this information. More disturbing were the markings Kalen had noticed on the woman's skin when treating her, a series of alphanumeric codes tattooed at the base of her neck, partially hidden by her hair. They resembled inventory designations more than identification, suggesting that wherever she had come from, she had been considered property rather than a person. As days turned into weeks, the initial tension began to ease. The woman, whom Kalen had mentally started calling Lyra after a constellation visible from Xylos, began recovering her strength. The baby, whom Lyra called something that sounded like Alara to Kalen's ears, was growing rapidly, already showing coordination and awareness far beyond what would be expected of a human infant. Communication remained rudimentary, a combination of gestures, simple drawings, and a small vocabulary of shared words. Lyra remained cautious, but no longer reacted with fear when Kalen entered the room. She watched him constantly, studying his routines, his technology, his behavior, learning him as if he were a complex text she was determined to decode. The first true moment of connection came during an equipment failure. The station's heating system, already struggling with age and neglect, failed during one of Xylos' brutally cold nights. Temperature in the medical bay dropped rapidly, threatening Alara, who seemed particularly sensitive to cold. Kalen worked frantically to repair the system, but progress was slow. Seeing Alara shivering despite being wrapped in all available blankets, Lyra made a decision. For the first time, she voluntarily approached Kalen, touching his arm to get his attention. When he looked up, surprised, she pointed to Alara, then to the main living quarters where his personal heater was still functioning. "Yes," Kalen said immediately. understanding her request. Yes, bring her there. It's warmer. That night, the three of them shared the same space for the first time. Lyra and Alara on Kalen's bed while he worked nearby, continuing his repairs. Occasionally their eyes would meet across the room, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This was progress, tenuous but real. Time passed differently in the closed environment of the research station. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months. Outside, the hostile landscape of Xylos remained unchanged, storms coming and going with predictable ferocity. Inside, a fragile new normal was taking shape. Alara grew rapidly, soon crawling, then taking her first unsteady steps at what Kalen estimated was only 3 months. Clearly her species developed faster than humans. Her features were a mesmerizing blend of her mother's alien beauty and something almost human, her skin shifting in hue depending on her emotions, her eyes intelligent and curious about everything. Communication between Kalen and Lyra improved steadily. They developed a pidgin language combining her musical sounds and his Earth standard, supplemented by drawings and gestures. It was crude but effective, allowing them to share basic needs, instructions, and eventually simple thoughts. Lyra began helping with station maintenance, revealing an intuitive understanding of technology that sometimes surpassed Kalen's own. Her long, dexterous fingers could reach into spaces he couldn't access, and she seemed able to sense electrical flows in a way that was almost supernatural to Kalen's eyes. In return, Kalen taught her about Xylos, about the station's systems, about sustainable living in this harsh environment. He showed her how to use the hydroponics bay, where he grew the nutrient-rich algae and hardy vegetables that formed their diet. She approached these lessons with intense concentration, absorbing everything he showed her. They established routines for caring for Alara, taking turns watching her so the other could rest or work. During these shared responsibilities, Kalen sometimes caught glimpses of Lyra's past through her reflexive reactions. The way she tensed at certain sounds, how she positioned herself between Alara and the door when unexpected noises occurred, her habit of checking escape routes in any room she entered. 6 months after her arrival, during a quiet evening when Alara had already been put to sleep, Lyra approached Kalen as he worked on yet another station repair. She sat nearby, watching his hands as he reassembled a water recycling component. Then, hesitantly, she reached out and touched a scar on his forearm, a remnant from the Exocorp disaster. "Hurt?" she asked, using one of the first Earth Standard words she had learned. Kalen paused, looking at the old scar. "Yes," he said simply. "Long ago." Lyra nodded slowly, then turned slightly and lifted her silvery hair to reveal the alphanumeric tattoo at the base of her neck. "Hurt," she echoed, but her tone made a shared statement rather than a question. For a long moment, they sat in silence, each acknowledging the other's pain without needing to understand its specific source. Then Lyra did something unprecedented. She took Kalen's hand and placed it over her own heart before touching his chest in return. "Same," she said in her accented Earth standard. "Same inside." It was their first true connection beyond survival and necessity, a recognition of shared trauma, of the wounds they both carried. Kalen felt something shift inside him, a wall beginning to crumble. That night, Lyra didn't return to the separate quarters she and Alara had been using. Instead, she brought Alara's makeshift crib into Kalen's room and placed it near his bed. Then, with deliberate calm, she lay down beside him, not touching, but close enough that he could feel the slight difference in her body temperature, cooler than a human's. Neither spoke. Words weren't necessary. They had both been alone for too long, carrying their separate burdens. Now, at least, they could be alone together. Spring on Xylos brought the massive dust storms the planet was infamous for. The first warning came from the station's exterior sensors, pressure dropping rapidly, wind speeds increasing beyond normal parameters. Kalen had experienced these storms before and knew the drill. Secure all external equipment, double-check the seals, prepare for potential power fluctuations. But this storm was different. The readings were off the charts, suggesting a once-in-a-decade event that could last for days and potentially damage the station's more vulnerable systems. Lyra sensed his concern as they worked together to prepare. "Bad?" she asked, securing equipment in the hydroponics bay as Kalen had shown her. "Very bad," Kalen confirmed, checking the oxygen recycling system's backup power. "We should be safe inside, but it's going to be rough." The storm hit with apocalyptic force. Visibility outside dropped to zero as swirling clouds of red dust enveloped the station. The howling of the wind through the external structures created an eerie, almost sentient wailing. The entire station vibrated with the storm's fury. Inside, they huddled in the central living area, the most protected section of the facility. Alara, now able to walk confidently and speak simple combinations of their shared language, was frightened by the noise and clung to both Lyra and Kalen alternately. "Story," she demanded, her blue-violet eyes wide. "Tell story." Kalen looked to Lyra, who usually handled bedtime stories. Complex musical tales he couldn't understand, but that always soothed Alara. But Lyra shook her head, gesturing to him. "Your world," she said. "Tell her your world." So as the storm raged outside, Kalen found himself describing Earth to a wide-eyed alien child. The oceans and forests, the cities and mountains, the animals and plants. He told her about rain that was water instead of caustic chemicals, about skies that were blue instead of rust red. He described snow and beaches, deserts and jungles. Lyra listened as intently as Alara, occasionally asking questions that revealed just how alien Earth would seem to her. The three of them formed a small island of calm. Amidst the chaos outside, connected by words and wonder, the storm's intensity increased through the night. Sometime after midnight, a particularly violent gust caused something to tear loose from the station's exterior, the impact reverberating through the structure. Warning alarms activated throughout the facility. Kalen rushed to the control room, Lyra right behind him after securing Alara in the central room. The displays showed multiple system failures. A breach in the outer hull had damaged the main power conduits, and the backup systems were struggling to compensate. "Not good," Kalen muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. "The main environmental regulator is offline. We're losing atmosphere integrity in sections 3 through 7. Lyra studied the schematics on the screen, her expression intent. Without hesitation, she pointed to a junction near the damaged area. "Here, can't fix." "It's too dangerous," Kalen argued. "That section's structural integrity is compromised, and the atmosphere out there." He shook his head. The storm would make the already hostile environment of Xylos absolutely lethal. But Lyra's expression was resolute. "I go. My body," she tapped her chest, different, "can breathe Xylos air." "Short time." Kalen stared at her in shock. "You can survive the atmosphere?" "Are you sure?" "Not long, but enough." Her violet eyes met his, determined. "Alara needs a safe place. We fix." The realization that Lyra's species might have evolved in conditions similar to Xylos was both scientifically fascinating and potentially life-saving. But the risk? "We'll do it together," Kalen decided. "I'll wear the environment suit. You guide me through the repairs since your hands are more dexterous than mining gloves. But at the first sign of distress, we abort." "Understood." Lyra nodded once, firmly. The repair operation was harrowing. The damaged section was being torn apart by the storm, metal groaning as it twisted under the assault of the elements. Kalen moved as quickly as the cumbersome environment suit allowed, following Lyra's precise instructions. True to her word, she could breathe the thin, toxic atmosphere of Xylos, though he could see it was painful for her. Her breathing became labored, her normally lavender skin taking on a grayish cast. They worked in perfect synchronization, Lyra's knowledge of electrical systems complementing Kalen's engineering skills. When a secondary power surge threatened to electrocute them both, it was Lyra who reacted instantly, pushing Kalen clear even as the energy discharge glanced across her arm, leaving an angry burn. With the critical junction repaired and the environmental system stabilized, they retreated to the safety of the pressurized central areas. Kalen immediately treated Lyra's burn, while scolding her for the unnecessary risk she'd taken. "You have Alara to think about," he said as he applied Burns' salve to her injured arm. "Don't be reckless." Lyra watched him work, her head tilted slightly. "You too," she said softly. "Have Alara too." Kalen's hand stilled. He looked up to meet her gaze, finding something there he hadn't expected. Trust, complete and absolute. Somewhere during these months together, he had become not just the reluctant rescuer or the convenient ally, but family. "Yes," he acknowledged, his voice roughened by emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "I suppose I do." The storm continued for 3 more days, but they weathered it together. The stations suffered damage, but nothing they couldn't repair once the winds died down. More importantly, something fundamental had changed in their relationship. The barriers of species and circumstance seemed less significant now. On the evening when the storm finally subsided, leaving an eerie silence in its wake, Lyra approached Kalen with the small disc she had brought from her escape pod. For the first time, she deliberately activated it in his presence, showing him the holographic display of symbols. "This," she said carefully, searching for words they shared, "is a warning." Over the next hours, through their limited shared language and with the aid of drawings and gestures, Lyra revealed her story. She had been part of a breeding program run by a species she called the Collectors, advanced beings who treated other sentient species as biological resources. Lyra had been genetically modified to carry children with specific traits, valued for reasons she didn't fully understand. But something about her last pregnancy, with Alara, had been different. Tests had shown that the child would be unique, possessing characteristics the Collectors hadn't intended. Rather than allowing this anomaly to live, they had scheduled termination of both mother and child. Lyra had escaped with the help of another captive, stealing the escape pod and a data disk containing information about the Collector's research. Her escape had been detected, her pod damaged during pursuit, and she had made a desperate blind jump through space, ending up in the Xylos system purely by chance. "They find me," she said, her expression grim. "Someday. They always find." The data disk contained not just her story, but a warning. The Collector's activities spanned multiple systems, and Earth was likely already within their sphere of influence. Their pattern was always the same: identify genetically interesting species, capture specimens, conduct breeding experiments, and eventually, once they had what they wanted, discard the entire species as no longer necessary. "Why show me this now?" Kalen asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Because trust," Lyra replied simply. "Because time's short." She believed the Collectors would eventually track the escape pod to Xylos. When they did, they would come not just for her and Alara, but would likely eliminate any witnesses, including Kalen. She was giving him the chance to leave, to take the station's emergency shuttle and return to Earth with this warning. Kalen sat silently for a long time after her revelation, processing the immensity of the threat and the choice she was offering him. Finally, he stood and walked to the viewport where the storm's aftermath was visible, a landscape transformed by shifted dunes and newly exposed rock formations. 3 years ago, he began slowly. "I was responsible for a project that went wrong. 43 people died because of my mistake. I've been running from that ever since, from responsibility, from connection, from the possibility of failing someone else." He turned to face her. "But when I found you in Alara, something changed. For the first time in years, I was afraid of something worse than failure. I was afraid of not trying, of walking away when someone needed help." Kalen moved closer, kneeling before Lyra, so they were at eye level. "I'm not going anywhere. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. The 3 of us." Lyra's eyes widened slightly, shimmering with emotion. Slowly, deliberately, she leaned forward until her forehead rested against his, an intimate gesture from her culture that she had never shared before. "Together," she echoed softly. That night, after Alara was asleep, their relationship transformed once more. Touches that had once been hesitant became deliberate. Words gave way to a more primal form of communication, skin against skin, breath mingling with breath. Their physical differences seemed insignificant compared to the emotional connection that had grown between them, forged in survival and mutual protection, tempered by shared purpose. In the aftermath, lying together in the quiet darkness, Lyra traced the outline of Kalen's face with gentle fingers, as if memorizing him by touch. "Your world," she whispered. "Show me someday?" Kalen caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Someday," he promised, though both knew it might never be possible. "But for now, we make our world here." The threat of the collectors loomed over them, a shadow on their horizon. But it also crystallized their priorities, making each day precious. Together, they strengthened the station's defenses, installing early warning systems and preparing contingency plans. But they also focused on living rather than merely surviving. Kalen expanded the hydroponics bay, creating a true garden where Alara could see plants grow and learn about life cycles. Lyra transformed their living quarters with designs and colors from her homeworld, creating beauty in the midst of Xylos's stark landscape. They salvaged materials from abandoned survey sites nearby, gradually transforming the utilitarian research station into a true home. As the months passed, Alara continued to develop at an astonishing rate. By what Kalen estimated was her first birthday, she was speaking in complete sentences in their blended language and showing an intuitive understanding of the station's systems that surpassed even Lyra's abilities. Her unique heritage seemed to have created something greater than the sum of its parts. She had Lyra's natural affinity for energy and electrical systems combined with a human-like adaptability and problem-solving approach. It was Alara who first detected the anomaly. She had been helping Kalen recalibrate the sensor array when she suddenly froze, her head tilted as if listening to something beyond human perception. "There's a hum," she said, her small face serious. From up, she pointed toward the sky. Kalen checked the sensors, finding nothing unusual. But he had learned to trust Alara's perceptions, which often detected things their technology missed. He initiated a deep space scan, extending the range far beyond Xylos's orbit. The results chilled him to the bone. A ship was approaching the system, massive, with energy signatures unlike anything in human databases. It would reach Xylos in approximately 72 hours. When he showed Lyra the scan results, her reaction confirmed his fears. "The collectors have found them. How do they track us?" Kalen wondered aloud as they gathered emergency supplies. The plan was to abandon the station, taking the rover to a network of caves in the distant highlands where the planet's mineral deposits might mask their life signs. Lyra indicated her own body. "Tracker. Inside." She pointed to a specific spot at the base of her skull. "Put in all specimens." The implication was clear. She had been carrying a subdermal tracking device all this time, dormant perhaps, or operating on frequencies their primitive equipment couldn't detect. "Can we remove it?" Kalen asked, already thinking through the medical equipment they had available. Lyra shook her head grimly. "Kill me." Connected to brain stem. Their options were limited. Staying at the station meant certain capture or death. Fleeing might buy them time, but with an active tracker, it would only delay the inevitable. It was Alara, listening intently to their discussion, who offered an unexpected solution. "Make it lie," she said simply, her child's voice clear and confident. "Make tracker see wrong place." Kalen and Lyra exchanged a glance. "What do you mean, little one?" Kalen asked. Alara's small hands gestured expressively. "Tracker says we here. Make it say we there." She pointed first to the station, then toward the vast empty plains to the east. The simplicity and brilliance of her suggestion left both adults momentarily speechless. What Alara was proposing was to create a signal amplifier that would capture the tracker's output and rebroadcast it with altered coordinates, essentially creating a false trail for the collectors to follow. "Could work," Lyra said slowly, her eyes brightening with hope. "Need strong amplifier. Precise tuning. I think I can build it," Kalen said, his mind already racing through the components they would need. "But we need to know the exact frequency of the tracker." Lyra touched the base of her skull. "Can feel it." when active feels, different, can help find frequency. They work through the night, Kalen and Lyra side by side, with Alara watching and occasionally offering insights that seemed impossible from child her age. Using salvage communication equipment and parts from the escape pod, they constructed a device that could detect, amplify, and alter the tracker's signal. Calibrating, it was the most difficult part. Lyra had to endure hours of discomfort as the tracker in her brainstem was deliberately activated by their equipment, sending sharp pains through her nervous system. But she remained focused, helping Kalen identify the exact frequency and signal pattern. By dawn, they had a working prototype. The plan was simple but risky. They would leave the amplifier at the station, broadcasting Lyra's altered signal toward the eastern plains. Meanwhile, they would take the rover west into the highlands, hoping that the collectors would follow the false trail long enough for them to find a more permanent hiding place. What if not work? Lyra asked quietly as they made final preparations, her eyes on Alara, who was carefully packing her few treasured possessions. A crystal from the caves, a plant growing in a small container, a drawing of the three of them. Kalen paused in his work. The question hung heavy between them. If their plan failed, capture seemed inevitable. And based on Lyra's experiences, capture would mean something worse than death, separation, experimentation, their family torn apart. Then we fight, he said simply. We've come too far to give up now. The moment of departure was tense. The amplifier was operational, sending out its deceptive signal. The rover was packed with supplies and equipment. All sensors indicated the collector ship was still approaching, now less than 48 hours away. As Kalen performed one final check of the rover's systems, Lyra walked through the station that had become their home, her fingers trailing over surfaces as if saying goodbye. Alara followed her mother, unusually quiet, her luminous eyes taking everything in. Ready? Kalen asked when they rejoined him. Lyra nodded, then surprised him by reaching up to touch his face gently. Thank you, she said softly, for saving us, for being family. Before Kalen could respond, a deafening boom shook the station. Warning systems blared to life as external sensors registered a massive energy surge on the planet's surface less than 10 kilometers away. They're here, Kalen shouted over the alarms. But how? Jump capability, Lyra explained rapidly, already moving to secure Alara in the rover. Small vessels, scout ships. Their plan had just collapsed. The collectors weren't approaching in 2 days. They were here now, having sent ahead smaller craft capable of atmospheric entry. We need to go, Kalen urged, powering up the rover. Now! But as they prepared to depart, the station's external cameras captured a chilling image. 3 sleek vessels, unlike any human craft, touching down in a triangular formation around the research facility. There would be no escape by rover. Other way, Lyra said urgently, pulling Kalen away from the airlock. Underground. She led them to the station's lowest level, to a maintenance shaft Kalen had shown her months ago during repairs. It connected to an old mining tunnel that led deep into Xylos's crust, an emergency escape route designed by the original station architects. The tunnel was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for them to crawl through single file. Kalen led the way, with Alara in the middle and Lyra bringing up the rear. Behind them, they could hear the unsettling sounds of the station being breached, metal tearing, systems shorting out, and worst of all, a high-pitched harmonic humming that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. Collector scan technology, Lyra whispered when Kalen glanced back questioningly. Searching for life signs. They pushed deeper into the tunnel, the rough-hewn passage gradually giving way to natural cave formations. The atmosphere processors that had once kept these tunnels breathable had long since failed, forcing them to rely on the portable oxygen units they'd brought. After what seemed like hours, but was likely only 40 minutes, they reached a large cavern where several mining tunnels converged. Ancient equipment lay abandoned, covered in the fine red dust that permeated everything on Xylos. Rest here, Kalen decided, seeing Alara's exhaustion despite her determination to keep pace. Then we'll continue to the secondary shaft. It should lead to the surface about 5 kilometers from here. As they caught their breath in the relative safety of the cavern, Kalen activated a small scanner he'd brought, a modified geological tool that could detect energy signatures. What he saw made his blood run cold. Multiple signals, he reported grimly. They've split up, searching different tunnels. And they're moving fast. Lyra's expression hardened. She reached into her pack and removed something Kalen hadn't seen before, a weapon of some kind, sleek and organic-looking like her escape pod had been. "Where did you get that?" he asked, surprised. "Hidden," she replied tersely. "From Pod 4. This time, she checked the device with practiced efficiency, suggesting she was far more familiar with weapons than her gentle demeanor had ever indicated. "You go," she said, her voice steady as she looked from Kalen to Alara. "Take Tunnel B7. Leads to old survey post. Has communication equipment. Maybe still works." Kalen understood immediately what she was suggesting. "No," he said firmly. "We stay together." Lyra shook her head, her silver-white hair catching the dim light of their portable lamp. "Tracker and me. They follow me. Not you." "All the more reason to stay together," Kalen insisted. "We can." "No time." Lyra cut him off, her violet eyes intense. "Listen, if separated, go to Araxis system. 4th planet. Colony there. My people, some free there. Tell them Lyra of House Velan lives. They help." Before Kalen could argue further, a sharp humming filled the cavern. The same harmonic resonance they'd heard at the station, but stronger now, painful in its intensity. Lyra shoved something small into Kalen's hand, the data disk. "Take. Important. Show your people." Her voice was urgent now. "Promise me. Protect Alara. Tell her." The far wall of the cavern suddenly glowed with an eerie blue light, the rock itself seeming to become transparent. Beyond it, distorted but recognizable, were figures taller than humans, with elongated limbs and oddly jointed movements. Collectors, Lyra breathed. In one fluid motion, she pushed Kalen and Alara toward the B7 tunnel entrance. "Go." "I slow them. Draw them away." The decision was impossible, unthinkable. Everything in Kalen rebelled against the idea of leaving Lyra behind. But the approaching figures, the weapon in her hand, the determination in her eyes, and most of all, Alara's frightened breathing beside him forced a terrible clarity. "We'll find you," he promised fiercely, pulling Alara close. "Whatever happens, we'll find you." Lyra's smile was sad but resolute. "No, you will." She looked down at Alara, touching her daughter's face one last time. "Be brave, little star. Remember who you are." Then she was moving in the opposite direction, toward the approaching collectors, her weapon raised. The last Kalen saw of her was her slender figure silhouetted against the increasingly transparent wall, her stance defiant and unafraid. With Alara's hand clutched tightly in his, Kalen plunged into the B7 tunnel. Behind them, there came flashes of intense light and sounds unlike anything he'd ever heard. Not quite explosions, but something more fundamental, as if reality itself was being torn. They ran, scrambled, and crawled through the mining tunnel for what seemed like an eternity. Alara kept pace without complaint, her eyes wide but her movements sure, as if some instinctive knowledge was guiding her. Occasionally they would stop to listen, but the sounds of pursuit, if there was pursuit, were impossible to distinguish from the normal settling and shifting of the cave system. The tunnel eventually began to angle upward, and the air quality improved, suggesting they were nearing the surface. Kalen's scanner showed no energy signatures nearby, which could either mean safety or that the collector's technology was beyond the device's capabilities to detect. When they finally emerged onto the surface of Xylos, it was night. The 3 moons hung in the rust-colored sky, casting multiple overlapping shadows across the barren landscape. In the distance, barely visible, was the outline of the old survey post Lyra had mentioned. Reaching it required crossing a dangerously exposed stretch of terrain, but they had no choice. Moving as quickly and quietly as possible, Kalen and Alara made their way across the rocky plain, every shadow seeming to harbor threats, every sound amplified by fear. The survey post was little more than a reinforced shelter with basic equipment, long abandoned like everything else on Xylos. But true to Lyra's word, it contained communication equipment, ancient and dust-covered, but potentially functional. Kalen set to work immediately, using his engineering skills to bypass damaged components and jury-rig the necessary connections. Alara watched intently, occasionally offering observations that guided his efforts in unexpected but effective directions. After hours of painstaking work, the communication array hummed to life. Its range was limited, but it might be enough to reach any ships in the system, perhaps a passing merchant vessel or patrol that could offer escape. But as Kalen prepared to broadcast a distress signal, Alara suddenly placed her small hand over his. "No," she said with quiet authority. "They listen, hear all signals." She was right, of course. Any broadcast would immediately reveal their location to the collectors. But what alternative did they have? Alara closed her eyes, her face taking on an expression of intense concentration. Then, to Kalen's astonishment, she began to manipulate the communication equipment with a surety that went beyond mere intuition. Her fingers danced across the controls, adjusting frequencies and modulation patterns in ways he couldn't follow. "What are you doing?" he asked softly, watching in wonder. "Calling," she replied simply. "Like Mother showed me. In dreams." Kalen didn't understand, but he trusted her. Whatever connection Lyra and Alara shared went beyond physical proximity, beyond normal communication. He had seen hints of it before, moments when they seemed to communicate without words, when Alara would respond to needs Lyra hadn't expressed aloud. The modified transmitter emitted no sound Kalen could hear, but Alara nodded with satisfaction. "They come," she said confidently. "Who, Alara? Who's coming?" "Mother's people. The free ones." She looked up at him with eyes that suddenly seemed far older than her young face. "We go to Araxis now." They waited through the long night, Kalen keeping watch while Alara slept fitfully. He found himself constantly checking the scanner, expecting at any moment to see the energy signatures of approaching collector vessels. But nothing appeared. As dawn broke over Xylos, the horizon shimmered with an unusual distortion. Kalen tensed, ready to grab Alara and run. But the child woke on her own, looking toward the phenomenon with recognition rather than fear. "They're here," she said simply. The distortion resolved into a vessel unlike either the collector ships or any human craft Kalen had seen. It was smaller, more organic in design, similar to Lyra's escape pod, but intact and purposeful in its construction. It descended silently, touching down a short distance from the survey post. A hatch opened, and two figures emerged, clearly of Lyra's species, with the same lavender skin and silver-white hair, though their features were distinct from hers. They approached cautiously, hands empty and visible. Alara stepped forward without hesitation, speaking in the musical language Kalen had heard Lyra use. The newcomers responded in kind, their expressions changing from wariness to shock to something like reverence as they looked at the child. One of them then turned to Kalen, speaking in halting but understandable Earth standard. "You Kalen? Who protect Lyra of House Velan and her daughter?" "Yes," Kalen confirmed. "Lyra told us to find you, to go to Araxis, but..." He hesitated, the question he feared most catching in his throat. The alien seemed to understand. "Lyra lives," they said simply. "Captured but alive. Collectors value her too much for termination." Relief flooded through Kalen, followed immediately by renewed determination. "Then we'll find her. We'll get her back." The alien studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Perhaps, but not alone. Come with us to Araxis. Meet others. Make plan." The decision required no thought. Xylos had been his refuge, his self-imposed exile, for 3 years. But it wasn't home anymore. Home was wherever Lyra and Alara were. His family, forged in the most unlikely circumstances, bound by something stronger than blood or species. As they boarded the alien vessel, Alara's small hand held tightly in his, Kalen took one last look at the red landscape of Xylos. He thought of the abandoned research station where everything had changed, where a man trying to escape his past had found a future instead. "We're coming, Lyra," he whispered to the wind. "Wait for us." The vessel rose silently into the atmosphere, leaving Xylos behind. Aboard, Alara climbed into Kalen's lap, her head resting against his chest as the stars beckoned beyond the viewports. "Will we find Mother?" she asked quietly. Kalen held her close, his arms protective around the miracle child who had brought him back to life. "Yes," he promised. "No matter how long it takes, no matter what stands in our way, we'll find her." Alara nodded, accepting his words as the absolute truth they were meant to be. "And then we'll be home again." "Yes," Kalen agreed, looking out at the vast expanse of space unfolding before them. "Then we'll be home." 5 years later, a garden flourished in the protected dome of the Araxes colony. Plants from a dozen worlds grew together in carefully cultivated harmony, creating an oasis of life and color. In the center of this garden, Kalen sat on a bench, watching Alara, now nearly as tall as a human child of 12, practice the flowing movements of her people's meditative martial art. Her growth had continued to astonish him, her mind and body developing at a pace that defied human norms. But more remarkable was her spirit, resilient, compassionate, and fiercely determined. In the colony, she had become something of a symbol to Lyra's people, many of whom had experienced the Collector's brutality firsthand. They called her the Convergence, the living proof that different species could create something new and wonderful together. Kalen had found his own place among these refugees, contributing his knowledge of biology and engineering to their efforts to build a sustainable colony hidden from the Collector's reach. He had learned their language, their customs, their history, a civilization far older than humanity's, nearly destroyed by the Collector's systematic exploitation, now rebuilding in secret corners of the galaxy. And all the while, they had searched for Lyra. Intelligence networks spanning multiple systems, informants within the periphery of Collector territory, analysis of communication patterns and transport routes. Every possible avenue had been explored. There had been hints, rumors, occasional confirmations that she was still alive, moved from facility to facility as the Collectors continued their obscure research. Today, however, was different. Today there was more than a rumor. Kalen looked down at the data tablet in his hand, reviewing once again the information that had arrived that morning. A secure transmission from a deep cover operative had provided coordinates, schematics, security protocols, everything needed to locate and potentially extract a high-value specimen being transported to a new Collector research hub. The operative had included one additional detail that had sent a jolt of electricity through Kalen's body when he saw it. The specimen's designation matched the alphanumeric code tattooed at the base of Lyra's neck. A shadow fell across the tablet, and Kalen looked up to find Alara standing before him, her practice concluded. Without a word, she sat beside him, her eyes on the information displayed. "It's her," she said quietly, not a question, but a confirmation. "I can feel it." Kalen nodded. After 5 years of searching, planning, preparing, the opportunity they had waited for was finally here. The rescue mission would be dangerous, perhaps impossible, but they had to try. "The council is meeting tonight to discuss the extraction plan," he told her. "They believe we have one chance during the transfer between facilities." Alara was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the outline of the Collector vessel shown in the schematics. Then she looked up at Kalen, her blue-violet eyes shining with the same determination he had seen in Lyra's all those years ago on Xylos. "We'll bring her home," she said with absolute certainty. Kalen put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "Yes," he agreed. "We'll bring her home." Around them, the garden continued its quiet growth, plants putting down roots and reaching for the light. Like the family they had formed, improbable, resilient, and absolutely determined to be reunited, life found a way to flourish even in the most challenging conditions. And somewhere, in a Collector facility, Lyra waited, never losing hope that the human who had risked everything to save her and the daughter who carried both their strengths would someday find her again. They would not fail her, no matter what obstacles stood in their way. No matter how vast the distance, they would bring her home. Because that's what family did. That's what love demanded. That was the promise that had been made in a dying research station on a forgotten planet, where a human and an alien had found each other against all odds and created something the universe had never seen before, a bridge between species, a family forged in the fire of survival, and a love that transcended the very stars themselves.